Oh my God, I did save. How awful would that have been? That's my tip. You know, you want to go into like, oh, tips for how to get kids to be good animators. Save, autosave, turn on autosave. The things that can happen in that 20 minutes. It's like, that was the 20 minutes that I made the magic, and now you're telling me it's gone? Hello, my name is Lana Bachynski. I'm a senior animator in R&D here at Riot Games. I do animate characters, and sometimes those characters are monsters, and sometimes those characters are people. Well, if you look at League of Legends and the scope of the different characters you could play as, if all of those in your brain are characters, then I'm a character animator. In some worlds, some people say I make gameplay, and so I'm a gameplay animator because I don't usually make cinematics. So I usually just like to keep it at, I'm an animator because I make things move. One of the things I'm proudest of, one of my first assets actually, was Bewitching Misfortune. I worked on her recall. It was 2 weeks after I started at Riot, and they were just like, you know how to do this already, like get in there. And I was really happy with the way that one turned out. And then sort of my beautiful baby, Spirit Blossom Ari, with such an incredible team. She was so great to work on, specifically because I got to do all the transformations between her human form and her fox form and do all the quadruped stuff, which I really like doing. Those are two of my favorites, but I also got to work on Dark Cosmic Lux, Spirit Blossom Thresh, and Seraphine. The KDA Seraphine was really amazing to work on as well. Today, I am really excited because I get to hang out with the familiar face, KDA Akali.
Let's get it. Akali that girl, Kali gon' grrr, Kali gon' stop, Kali gon' skirt, Kali got a job, Kali got a word, 뜨거워 언제나 don't get burned.
And I'm going to show how to animate a slightly elevated weight shift or pose shift between two different key poses in 3D space. Akali, she has so many wonderful skins and she appears in so many places. To me, she is like sort of this quintessential bold, tough girl, almost like a Sporty Spice in the KDA situation. Yeah, she's like a little bit tougher, but like with this sweeter side. One of my favorite moments from KDA's most recent videos was when she's hanging with Seraphine and they're both doing these tough girl faces, but she gives her a little elbow. She's very playful. And so with some of the poses that I'm starting out with, I'm sort of mixing both of those, starting with the tough girl kneel, hip-hop kneel that she has in some of her earlier KDA stuff, and ending with something a little bit sweeter with a little finger heart, and seeing how we can blend between those two different attitudes and really bring them together into sort of showing two sides of her character here. I'm honestly very intimidated to animate Akali because I've never animated her before, and she is such a beloved character by the players that, you know, we've got just a couple hours here, gonna see what kind of justice I can bring to my girl. This rig that I'm using today is KDA Akali. It was some of her casual wear. This was actually created by two Riot artists, Jason Namgung and Omar Garcia. Jason did the beautiful model. Omar Garcia is the tech artist, so he made the rig for this. What we're starting with here kind of looks like a mess. There's a common thing with animation that people often just say, you know, you're animating on the computer, it's like a puppet, so you'll put some poses in and then you press the animate button. If you just press play after you put the poses in, things should look good, theoretically. But if I just hit play on this video with these two poses, you can see that it looks like trash. And all of her body is twisting inside of herself because of the different spaces that we have the controls in. And really, when you're in the computer and you're animating in this program that we use called Maya, you're fighting the computer to make sure that you are getting the vision that you want and not just letting the computer do what it wants to do, which is like a linear interpolation between two objects in space. So I blocked in two poses here, one of Akali. I'll pop to my scene camera here. One of Akali sort of looking a little sweeter with the little finger hearts here, and one with Akali sort of kneeling down and doing a little bit more of like the tough girl situation. And today I'm gonna show a way that you can blend between these two key poses. So let's get going. I work in a format that is known as the layering technique. A lot of people work in a pose to pose where they're working in step keys and they're crafting a whole beautiful pose just like this, but like the very next frame that they want and everything looks perfect, and then they sort of smooth things out as they go along. I don't work like that, so it's gonna look weird and bad for a long time, and then suddenly you're gonna start seeing the pieces falling into place. So when I'm doing a big move like this, one of the first things I'm thinking about is the root or the weight of like the center of mass of my character, or the center of gravity. So this main control, this pink one around the hips here, some people call it the cog or the root. I'm thinking about where my root is going to be. And so right now all the weight is sort of over her toe, and I want to figure out a way in order to move this bottom foot or to move her out of this position. I have to pull her weight off of that foot somehow. So let's do that. I could just have her sort of like lean forward here, and then that's pulling the weight off the back foot and she could lift it up. But because she's Akali and she's like pretty nimble and agile, I think we should do something a little bit cooler than that. I select the whole rig, and I'm just gonna hold her here for a little bit longer to make sure that she's not moving immediately from this pose. So I'm gonna pop to frame 5 and just lock her down so she doesn't move there for a little bit. And then I think I actually want to have her do sort of like a leg swoop to turn her in this other direction, because she has to end facing the other way. I already have a pose here where her feet are facing the other direction and her root is facing the other direction, so I'm gonna copy that over, which looks a little funky, but I'll pull it back in space. This one, I actually want to maintain its place in the world and just be facing the other direction. So I'm gonna just fully flip it 180, and then I'll figure out it's floating around a little because of where the foot roll is on this control, where she's up on her toe. It rotates around sort of the middle of her foot, but I will fix that. And now her root is really high up. We don't actually want that. We just want her facing that way, and we'll squat her down. And then if we're doing a foot swoop around this leg, we probably actually want fully extended and maybe the heel facing towards us. Oh yeah, looking beautiful. So you might notice that her knees are going all crazy. I have to bring her knees back around in 3D animation. Every little piece, it's like playing with a Barbie doll, right? Like if you want to point something in one way or another, that's not just gonna happen automatically. You really have to manually take these controls and put them where you want them to go. Something that makes it a little bit easier for me to animate often enough, it makes it actually a little tougher right now because I am doing this spin, is I like to keep some of my bones, these controllers that I use, in something called world space. So I fixed the head, but I'll just delete this key quickly. You can see that her head is completely maintaining the rotation from that initial pose, even as her whole body turns around. Even though it looks really difficult right now, I have to like manually rotate the head around to face the correct way. In using world space, you get sort of like a lot of interesting motion and sort of balance of the character for free. So I like to keep my head and my shoulders in world space while I work, which can make spins challenging, but overall I find to be a really good and easy way to get some solid sort of balance of the character in there. Great, so we're just gonna do a really rough pose here because I don't know exactly how long we might wanna keep her squatted down or swooped around here for. But you can see that the computer is just interpolating directly between these two poses, which means we're not really getting the leg swoop as we want. So in order to get that, I have to manually move this foot. I have to kick it out for the swoop the whole time to make sure that as it's coming around, it's going to actually rotate around her body in a way that makes sense. And again, we're just going really, really rough. Go to check my scene camera and see where that leg ended up. So I ended up a little closer to camera than I think I want, so I'm actually gonna move it back this way so that we get a nicer silhouette on the end of that kick. Like many disciplines, like game development in general is a really collaborative space, so if I'm thinking just like technically on paper in the pipeline, it fits between tech art and sort of audio would be the two sort of pieces there, and effects is sort of partnered with animation, though a little bit staggered. But animation I often think of as something that is kind of a glue for a lot of the rest of the departments because our work relies so heavily on working with other people and getting things into the game engine, making sure that we're working with engineering and we have the tools we need, communicating with designers to make sure that we're doing the animations that are required and also the right frame lengths, talking with effects artists so that this beautiful marriage, sometimes animation, it's not everything. There's beautiful effects that are often elevating animation beyond anything that we could do, and then making sure if we're making changes and collabing with audio to really get that oomph in there. Animation, it can be a bit of a hub and helping other people communicate and be a go-between between these other departments. Or ideally, everybody is sort of in there together, swirling around. But in the scheme of the pipeline, it sort of falls in the middle. And so coming in earlier to get the ideas and helping avoid possible trouble areas that you might run into by voicing what can or cannot be done, both in helping people show that there's so much more that can be done with animation or helping them be like, whoa, let's rein it in. I think it's good to get animators in as early in the process as possible. So this foot looks really wacky. I'm going to drop onto the heel. Oh, no, that's a little too soon. Maybe up a little bit, and then we're getting some weird rotations. This crazy thing that I keep bringing up is called the graph editor. And it is what I use primarily to polish up my animations. But when there's like kind of funny movements and things, I can open it up to see where there might be like these curves going crazy. Reading the graph editor, I feel like at first ends up feeling a little bit like Neo in the Matrix, where you're like, I don't even see these lines. I guess more like Cypher, I just see translate Y, translate Z. It's just all the same to me. But each of these lines corresponds to emotion. So if we're looking at translate Y, the Y-axis is up and down. We learned that in math class. And so if I take this and bring her way up here, you can see that there adds a key that's up in the air there. So if I want to look at just the Y-axis of the character, I can see it with my eyes and all the other bones and things moving around, but I can also just see more mathematically what's happening on that specific control at any time, which I find really helps me process what's happening with my animations. I've always been really big into knowledge sharing in general and helping people who are interested in animating and being in game development specifically. Is like the whole industry only gets better the more people want to be in the industry and want to do this kind of thing. So as much as we can make knowledge sharing accessible to people, like the better games we're going to get, the cooler animations we're going to have. I just think there's so much value in sharing as much as we can. That's just what I think, though. What I'm doing in this animation right now, this first pose is a little tedious because this first transition is a little tedious because it's got like the main spin. Getting a character to sort of like realistically spin their weight in the 3D space can be a really challenging part of this. So I'm spending a little bit more time here than I think I normally would. But I'm going to move through the rest of this fairly quickly, and I think this is when it starts getting interesting and particularly janky looking, I guess. So what I've done is I've done like a rough spin. There's like a really light amount of weight shift happening. Looking at my graph editor, I want to sort of like have her shifting her weight up, but then also back a little bit onto her foot a little earlier. So I'm just tweaking that here so that she starts moving backwards. Maybe she should actually move down a little bit. Maybe it should be a sinking in feeling. And then this needs to hold for like another frame or two before the foot actually starts moving. Kicking in, I think. And then the arm maybe coming out to counterbalance, just adding a little bit of sort of effort to this motion and a little bit of helping her sort of balance herself here. I've got some extraneous keys. It's often like things will feel like pretty unnatural if I'm not starting to do that at a certain point in time. But often I sort of notice when things are off when I'm watching an animation, there's like a very sudden absence of space where something once was. And so for this spin with her body really tight, we've got her whole body sort of facing towards the left of the screen here. And then if she just pops in this other direction, it doesn't make sense as far as like Newton's law to have just complete absence of mass there all of a sudden. So there needs to be a more clear transfer of energy. Where is that weight going? If she's shifting all of it off of whatever she's putting on that front foot, that energy and that mass that she's carrying has to go somewhere. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about. So as she's coming here, she's sort of losing balance, so she's sticking her arm out to sort of catch that. And then I'll try and get some more force of her sort of leaning to have the idea that she's flexing those muscles, like flexing her obliques to force that leg around into the swoop is sort of what we'd have here. So realistically, I think I would actually have even the whole root kind of leaning through here, and the leg is what should really be driving that motion. I don't think she needs to stick it so hard to this last pose. We can have her kind of swoop out and then in So she's carrying the momentum into the squat. I think we're gonna leave it there for now, and then we're gonna move on to the next section. Now that I have like a rough idea of what I want for this first section, one of the things I like to do is like just copy a key over and sort of hold it to kind of an arbitrary time so that it sort of adds a hold in there. This is where some people would use a stepped key function, which is in the graph editor here. You can see there's a little staircase. So if I wanted, I could take all of these keys and put the stepped function on, and then you wouldn't see anything, and it flattens it out. So you're seeing the poses that you put in there. That's how some people sort of fight the computer, like I mentioned earlier. But I find that really hard for me to process the actual timing of what's happening there. So I'll sort of put these, it's called copied pairs. I actually recently figured out that was the name of the technique. I will duplicate the key that I previously had to create a hold where nothing's happening, but I have a better understanding that that is like a pause versus anything else. I'm not super happy with the way she's flowing into this hold yet, but we can come back and fix that. I did study anatomy. I think it helps. I think there is a way to get like a really well-rounded artistic education that can supplement anything you want to do in sort of any facet. I think taking animation classes can help you be a better fine artist, for example, because you'll understand the muscles, but also when they're moving, you get like this idea of motion that you can help bring into your fine art pieces, just like know where the energy again is coming from. And so too vice versa. Understanding anatomy helps me understand ways to not break the character or ways that I can break it without it seeming weird. Smear frames is like a really common thing in animation. You'll see a couple things that are unnaturally stretched, held unnaturally long, but knowing which sort of joints to do that with is my anatomical education sort of helped me there. Learning all about the muscles and how the body moves, and even just like, we'd have like figure models up on a stage and you'd draw them. But we had really excellent figure models where they'd be like, okay, now hold your body like you're about to throw a baseball. And you would see the way the muscles would flex. So you would have like a better understanding of how they connect to the different motions that you would be animating later. It was cool. I'm like, I can't say that every time I'm animating, I'm thinking like, oh yeah, the delts are really doing their thing, but I will say in times that I'm struggling, taking a step back and thinking about it at a more bare bones anatomical level can help me sort of unblock myself if I'm struggling with a particularly challenging motion or something. Okay, so now that I have this hold, I know I want the character to kind of jump and land somewhere close to where she's going to end up. So when I want to have her land close to where she's going to end up, she's already pretty close. I might move her back a little bit in a bit. I am going to copy the position of her root and her feet, because those are the two things that if I sort of move them around, it'll move the whole character to somewhere close to where I might want her to land. So let's say she's going to land around frame 45, and it'll be somewhere close to here. I've now copied those positions. But in between, I want her to sort of leap up and to sort of, I always think of Akali as like jumping, like hitting like extreme kind of martial poses. So I want to kind of have that in there as part of this transition. So as she does this little swoop, I'm just going to bring just her root up, actually, and maybe her upper body into something way up here. And then I'll zero out her spine. So she's coming kind of straight up and down. And I want her to be facing the camera. So she's coming through this whole motion. She should really be facing forward here. This is going to be a little broken. This is why twisting characters is always a challenge, because you got to untwist them again in a way that's going to make sense for your animation. So I'm going to have her jump up in the air, probably higher than people can normally jump, because she's really strong and she got those martial capabilities. And then I want her to stay in the air for quite some time and kind of hang out there, and then she's going to land. So she's leaping straight up in the air, and she's going to hold it there, but we're doing sort of cartoony time. She's going to have some hang time that's not normal to people, because if we're looking at this arc, it's sort of like a table top, but we want to keep a little bit more life in it. If she were just jumping more like a person would jump, it would look something a little bit more like this, where you would have the energy coming out of the push-off, and then you'd have gravity starting to take over, and then she'd fall again. But in like a tunier timing and adding a little hold up there, the idea is that we're extending that time that gravity's taking to take over, and then gravity's going to take over really quick. And she'll kind of get vacuumed back down to the ground again. So we can sort of see how this looks, and it looks dumb. And it's always a fun part of animation to get this in. And she's falling a little quick too. So I'm gonna just work on my timing by pushing these keys in the timeline and feeling the rhythm of it. So swoop, up, and then she needs a little down. Maybe we'll even actually bring her further down because it's not super impactful just to land straight up like that. When I'm animating, I'm often thinking about like what the rhythm is that you feel, almost more like music in a way. An animation that feels too even, where everything is on the exact same cadence, becomes predictable and people can feel that. But if you have like a jazzier rhythm that's like, wow, you can feel that rhythm happening through the animation, and it makes it something exciting to look at. So I'm always striving for something that is not predictably rhythmic in my animation. So on this down, I think we're actually gonna bring her even further down. So rather than sticking the landing straight up like this, we're gonna have her sort of strike a cool pose. And then once again, we gotta fix the knees. And then we want her to hold at the bottom there for a bit. I don't know how long. Probably just a little bit longer. And then she'll come up into her final pose. And then we'll just add a little bit of cheap overshoot right now, going in the graph editor and just bumping that up a little. So you can see that was my rotate. We want the translate Y. Just give her a little overextension at the top so that it feels like, again, that energy of her sort of standing up is coming up. And maybe we don't want that. Maybe we want it to be more of an ease in. We'll leave it at the cheap overshoot for now. I'm gonna pop back to my scene camera, which is how I actually want this to be rendered, and we'll see what's up. So right now she's going a little off camera, so we'll probably have to adjust the camera. But let's check out this pose, or lack thereof, for now, and maybe make it a little bit cooler. Just anytime I'm animating, I don't know why I think of this so often. Probably because when I was a student, I made all the same mistakes that now I try to encourage people to avoid. Always make sure you're moving your clavicles. When I first started animating, I was like, why do I have two controls that move the shoulder? But it's really important to get that clavicle motion in there, that shrugging motion, and not just this, because if you're animating something and they're landing, and you just have them do this, or if they're jumping and you have them wind up and you just have them lift their arms and jump like that, you're not getting the full range of motion. Again, you're not getting the energy that they're about to release into this jump isn't coming from anywhere. And having the clavicles is like, and the tightening of the body is how you get like really desirable, beautiful exaggeration of the character in the posing. Some people say the clavicles are the eyebrows of the body. So if you want to be really expressive with your animation, in the same way with your face, if you never animated the eyebrows, the face would look really dead, no matter how dynamic the mouth features you're doing or the squints you're doing. The same thing with the shoulders. You want to make sure that they are alive and adding to your animation. It's funny to learn how to see in a way. Like, practicing animation is definitely about, practicing work, practicing art, just like any art form is. I guess art in general is kind of that. It's just learning how to use your eyes in a way that you're actually parsing the information that you need to create something that emulates it. It's an interesting space to exist in. I'm deleting a bunch of keys here because my arm was twisting around weirdly and I could not quite figure out why. So I'm just starting over. That's one of the really beautiful things about working in this technique is I don't really feel tied to any particular poses because I haven't really made any particular poses. And so when I have to sort of delete things and go back in to adjust, I don't feel married to what I've done in a way that makes me less willing to just delete things and start over when I need to. Which I think, once again, like in any art form, is like a really important skill to build, is like a resilience to sort of letting go of work, letting go of the need to control it in a particular way. Okay, so now we have rough timing for sort of the whole animation, and it overall looks pretty bad. This is a little soft coming down here. I keep everything keyed on like the whole body through these poses, even though they're really rough, so that I can easily adjust the timing. I find the landing really soft because the feet sort of touch and then really slowly scooch out. So I think I want the feet to touch a lot faster into what we call like the contact pose, aka you're contacting the ground. Keep her up a little higher during that pose. And then she slides out so far. I want her really feeling like she's catching herself. She's catching the weight from being in the air. So we're just adjusting that timing by moving these keys closer together, because the less time there is between the keys, the faster it will feel. So swoop, boing, and then the whole thing, I think, can come together a little faster on the air as well. And then I don't think I want her to hold here for quite so long. I want it to really feel like she's using the kick to push off. So we want just a couple frames of her holding this pose, the tightening of the energy before the spring. And then we can have a little bit more time back in the jump. A note that when I'm doing demo reel reviews, for people that I find happens the most is missing the clear transfer of weight from one foot to another, one limb to another. I see it a lot where somebody will animate a character sort of standing there on both feet, and then they will just move a foot. And I always sort of reply to those people and I say, like, just standing in this pose, if you are to emulate that and you want to do this right now, what would it look like if you tried to pick your foot up when you're standing on both feet? And the answer is you can't. You can't do that. You'll just fall over. If you slide your foot out from underneath yourself when you don't have your weight held on your other leg, you will just faceplant. And your characters need to do the same thing. Otherwise, there's a complete lack of believability in that energy. And there are ways to get around that. You can like pop from one frame to another really quickly and like let a game engine sort of deal with the interpolation to try and get a really bursty feeling move. But even still, I would usually want to see like a little bit of contact, a little bit of indication of where that weight has gone, where the energy is gone, and where it's going to. Talk about animation a lot in the frame of energy because it is kinetic. It has to sort of believably follow physics to a degree enough that when you do something like extreme, like have them hold in the air or float in the air, the people who are viewing your work can suspend their disbelief at the actions that these characters are taking. So like when I'm looking at this moment at the beginning here and I want her to swoop her foot around, right now it's not super believable because she does it super quick. But having even just this little moment where she's shifting her weight over to that side and sort of catching it on this hand that is quote unquote touching the ground there, it ends up feeling more believable that she can do that really quickly because she's clearly countering this broad move that she's doing with other parts of her body. So that is probably the number one. Other than the clavicles, it's tough. Between the two of them, it's like they could fight about which ones I see more frequently in people who are just learning animations sort of work. It's pretty close. The thing that initially got me interested in animation, I was in high school. There was a class that was called Applied Graphic Arts, and I studied photography, like film photography and developing and learning Photoshop. I learned web design, and I learned animation in a program called Cinema 4D. And Cinema 4D is like a great sort of starter program, and now I think it's mostly used for motion graphics, but I was like immediately hooked into, I just like followed a tutorial. I made like little donut-shaped things spin around my initials, and then it all exploded, and I was like, this is the dopest dope I've ever seen. It was like the coolest thing, and I was good at it, and it was like, I could do it quickly, and yeah, it was like a tutorial, but I quickly started like making my own little rigs and doing little animations and stuff. And I had a really fantastic teacher who sort of pointed, he had like posters on the wall of all these different video games and movies from like Pixar and Disney, etc. And he was like, do you see what you're doing? You're here every day at lunch, like after school, you show up early just to use this program. Do you realize that the people who make these get paid to do that? And I was like, I did not realize that whatsoever, but I pretty quickly, I mean, I don't want to say I put the pieces together because he had to pretty much like shove it in my face. But once I had the pieces together, everything was pretty well downhill from there. So I'm pretty happy with this timing here. It's not perfect, but we got to keep on keeping on. And so now it's like I'm tired of having it sort of looking as it is. Like there's no pose in the air. We've just animated the root. And so we're going to start going in and these key moments of rest fleshing it out and actually having some poses in there that make sense for what she's doing. So a really easy sort of win here is let's create an in-air pose for Akali that fits more of the action that she's taking. So I'm going to have her sort of coming up into something that is more dynamic, something that I think you'd see more on pieces of like her concept art or even the types of actions that she takes in games. A really sort of classic dynamic air pose is like tucking the legs up underneath so you get like a really beautiful kind of V shape. And we're gonna get that going. So let's get the knees up and the toes pointed down. And it really adds to the feeling of height that she's getting. And then it also, just looks cool. She looks confident and capable while she's doing it. And, that's really what matters, is the style, the flair. This is KDA. It's not about practicality. It's about being a badass. And so that's what we're gonna get done. Trying to make her feet less symmetrical because in animation and art and a lot of things, symmetry is something that can be like really, in animation, we often call things that look identical or moving at the exact same time, we call it twinning. And similar to like trying to find a cadence or a rhythm of the animation itself, what twinning can like look really visually boring or specifically it feels really predictable. And I think trying to add moments of unpredictability and excitement in your animation is something, once again, that is to be strived for. And so asymmetry in your poses and your actions is something that can help do that. So she's just jumped up, I think, at like sort of the top of her pose here. Her arms would sort of carry whatever energy she had and sort of bring it out. And the energy would probably kind of flow all the way through her palms and out her fingertips. I actually work in a way that's called like weighted tangents, which is like a contentious way to work, I find. If you're on Twitter and you're like, weighted tangents are great, you're gonna get like an onset of other animators being like, boo, and some people like, yes! It's like very spicy because in my opinion, it minimizes the number of keys that you have to look at in the graph editor, which when you have the whole character selected can look like a bit of a mess. Like if I just zoom in on this, it's like, oh my gosh, what is happening? It's crazy. But if I wanted to do an ease, which I want to right now, let's use this jump motion where she's kind of sticking in the air. I know I'm not going to want it to be quite so straight down on either side. I can move this key in, and I can take just this tangent handle of this curve and drag it out, and it'll create a curve that I would have to probably add at least one more key to get right if I were not using weighted tangents. And the same thing on the other side. I also use buffer curves, so sometimes if I have an extraneous curve, I'll actually even delete it, and I'll shrink that tangent, and then I'll make this ease kind of have like a sharper drop-off. And it's creating a similar curve to the one I had before, but it's smooth because this is where the computer can help. It's doing like the kind of math I want for me, but I can control it by using these tangent handles. So that is my preferred way of doing sort of easing in and out. But if I add like a key in here, sometimes this line will be like, meh, and that's what people don't like about the weighted tangents. But I'm always looking at the graph editor and the relationship of what the actual curves in the graph editor are doing to my character. So I'm never bothered by that in particular. So moving into this jump, one of the things that will sort of really immediately make it feel more like a jump versus just like weirdly blending between two keys. Like this is sort of how it sits right now. She is in this pose, and then she comes up here, and then she hits this pose, and that doesn't feel really great. But that's because she doesn't feel like she's pushing off. And so this is when, even though I have most of the keys right now stamped on the same sort of places, where we can start to break it up and get some of the actions happening at different times. So I probably want her feet actually staying on the ground for at least one, maybe even two more frames. And I probably want her pushing off the ground harder because I don't want as much of an ease out because I want to really feel the force of her jumping. So looking at my graph, I can feel like it was like a slower out because there's like a bit of a slow to this curve and then it tapers off again. So I'm gonna bring this way in so she really sort of pops out of that and into that jump. She's sort of moving in a strange, she's like hitting this wall here. You can see it flattens out, so she's not having any more move horizontally through space on the X or the Z axes. And so if I delete those curves, she'll feel like she's starting to jump through space. but it's not quite right because I want her to have a little bit of an initial kick and then be like slightly more linearly following through that space. Maybe a little less, so there's a little more straight up movement. And then her feet now are sort of beating her to her location, so I'll drag those. I think that I study a lot when I'm animating a character. When I'm working on something, I want to know what that subtext is. And so maybe there's something about my life experiences that has made me want to do that, to like specifically learn who these people are. I mean, I grew up acting. Maybe that has helped me. My parents like met on stage. My mom was a director, and so I spent a lot of time in the theater growing up, like the children's community theater, not like fine opera houses or whatever. So maybe there's a piece of like that acting, I guess, a willingness to look or be or feel silly. I think there is like a strange vulnerability that comes with animating in that to talk about characters and to sort of embody these characters that we're animating, it can get really silly sometimes. Like your serious meetings with people are like both of you standing up and like, how would Akali really swing her little swords? Would she do this? And you both have like wooden sticks that like kind of realistically reflect the weight of whatever the weapon is. And that's like a silly thing to try and be someone you're not. My willingness to be silly from acting growing up and a life of being maybe too loud at times, I think maybe is the life experience that has given me, if not a unique perspective, perhaps at least lends well into being willing to be as silly as I need to be to get the job done. To make sure that something is like, loud enough to hit the back wall, both in like your body posture and also like your actual volume of talking, I think is like a part of that. Okay, so we have her kind of jumping. It feels okay. I'm going to have her feet start a little lower and raise a little higher and a little further. And I think her knees can kind of come out to feel a little bit more agile through this. I also haven't used her hips at all. Much like the clavicles, the hips can be really useful in making sure that your poses are actually sort of sinking comfortably the way that you want them to. So now this is a little bit of it's a little smudgy at the bottom here. And I think that just means she's like sinking too far into this, so it doesn't feel like it's a tightening of the muscles to catch herself. It just feels like a little loose in a way. We want her to feel like she is really powerful and strong. And so being able to kind of stick the landing, I think, is a part of that. We want to drag this foot, or maybe actually move it sooner. Have her shift her weight in this return a little earlier so that she's starting that weight shift, so it makes sense that she can move this other foot. All right, it's kind of coming together. We can kind of see that she's actually moving more like a way that makes sense for Akali. Let's make this landing pose something more nice to look at here. So she's actually going to land. She's going to pull probably some of that weight up onto her toe, which I think she is. Her foot is spinning out for some reason. Let's not do that. I think her foot is already like in the right spot for landing, and coming up onto her toe might be the right call here. There we go. Feels more like she's landing on it, catching her weight and like making sure she can lean forward enough, and then sort of relaxing her foot and bringing that roll down as she is putting weight back onto it. And then as she comes up, her weight needs to come forward so she's actually on balance. So the process of, I was like, let's make this pose pretty, and then immediately got distracted by everything else. So we brought her toe up, having her shoulder sort of catch herself, but we want her arms to sort of be out for balance. I want her kind of tense and like ready, but not too extreme. To carry through some of that momentum, we can kind of have her swing through this way, and then she can counterbalance with her arms, and then have her kind of like look up over, like underneath her eyes, I think would be, or underneath her eyebrows, giving her sort of like an intensity there. And then this arm, I think, can come through like ready here, but then actually follow through and end up being a little bit more relaxed. And again, mostly just wanting to make sure that it stays like really asymmetrical compared to, like we don't want the arms to feel like they're doing the exact same thing on both sides just because it's boring. There's really no other good reason for that. I think the ponytail, even though it swooshes to one side, if you move her to a different side, still being able to see that she has that iconic swoop in the silhouette is more important to me. Maybe there's a concept artist who would correct me. Seeing that ponytail swoop is there is more important than it being perfectly on the correct side all the time, if you ask me. So because we just added this pose, I'm gonna make sure that I select all the controls I just used and hold them through the pose to make sure that it's gonna stay, because we kind of changed from our initial landing. And now she's gonna blend into that. So we wanna make sure she's not like already falling, because she's kind of like leaning forward. She looks kind of afraid as she comes in for this landing. So we wanna make sure that she feels really confident as she's coming down here. We can probably have this foot further delayed, again, so it's not hitting the exact timing as the other foot. And we can create that visual interest to having the delayed reaction. It'll also make more sense for like when she plants her foot down, like the other one is, this one is gonna keep going. So your eye can sort of visually catch the fact that this one is like scooting forward more. And so you get both reads. She's hitting the ground and then also catching herself as these two separate reads. We're gonna hold her up just a little bit longer. This part of the animation process is really noodly, as we say, in that some people have like really balanced methods and they go through and they're like, this is my first pass and I take these steps. This is my second pass and I take these steps. When I think often enough animation is just about looking at it and seeing what feels wrong when I'm looking at it right now and then fixing that thing. And then playing the animation again and saying what feels wrong now and fixing that thing. I do think there are like strategies that you can go through and you can have the principles up and be like, now I'm gonna check my arcs and make sure that they're all perfectly smooth. And now I'm gonna check my eases to make sure that everything is easing perfectly. And that's like a really fine formulaic way of working. But when I was first learning, that kind of formula never worked for me and never stuck to me and actually made it more challenging for me to feel like I could express myself through this medium. If animation is something yet you're trying to learn and you want to get into this, there's no right way to do it. All that really matters is your end product. And so if you find something that works for you and allows you to get the imagery that you want and help to sort of create life where there was not life before, then like power to you and do it to it. So what I'm looking at now is adding a little bit more life to these feet. I'm giving them a little bit of offset for that visual interest. And as they carry through, I notice that she feels really, really flat. Like she feels like she's traveling kind of horizontally. So I'm doing some little things to change that, adding a slightly different trajectory to the toe scooping through. You can see a little bit more of that arc happening in, like if you tracked just the bottom of that toe, you can see that that toe has a slightly more parabolic shape, which helps people sort of start suspending that she is capable of doing this because the gravity is somewhere, just because it wasn't where they initially expected it to be. It definitely is still very much existing in this world. I'm also turning her sideways a little bit on the feet to create a little bit of a better silhouette based upon sort of the angle that I'm animating, because I know my game camera is not perfect. But we do see her from the side, and it's more exciting to see both of those knees in like a cool shape than like foreshortening the leg and looking directly down the camera ends up looking a little bit more boring and a little less dynamic. Anybody who has ever heard me speak before knows that like my go-to tip for animators looking to break into the industry is finding a community. Whether you're wanting to go into film or advertising or whatever kind of animation you want to do, like animation is everywhere, you will always be working with people. Like unless your dream is that you only work on solo projects for the rest of your life, which is like a totally great dream. You just want to make the only thing that you want to make and you don't want to make it with anybody, in which case, this tip is not for you. If that's the life you want to live, this tip is not for you. But if you are interested in working in a place like Riot Games, we collaborate constantly collaborate. finding people that you trust to help like look at your work and sort of get you out of your own head can be just massively important, both to practicing what we call soft skills in the industry, which is communication, being able to collaborate with people, being able to give feedback and receive feedback. Like all of those are really important parts to like working smoothly in a group to create a product. So finding community helps you practice those soft skills. It also just helps to like not do this stuff alone a lot of the time. Like, it's so easy to get in your own head about your work and be like, ugh, I'm bad. Like, I'll never do anything good. It's too easy to let yourself fall into those little mental traps for whatever reason. And so fighting against that by having people who can be your eyes for you when you struggle to see for yourself is really, really important. That is always my tip. If you meet people in this community, like networking is such like a sleazy word. It's really just making friends. But if you are part of a community and one of those people in the community gets a job in a place that you want to work, chances are they'll be like, you know who's wonderful? This friend who's this talented animator, and I already have a great relationship with them. And so being able to make friends who have a similar mindset can help you just at like that base networking level of knowing other people who are interested in this and could take you along the ride, and vice versa. Everybody can lend a hand and we can all get where we want to go. It's great. So something with my fall here, sorry, sort of cutting into new ideas. I'm noticing that there's like a couple too many frames. Like it feels weird and not impactful. So I just selected the whole character through sort of like the part that I like, and I'm just gonna delete. I key on the frame before and the frame after, and I just delete one of the frames out until it feels more right. And that was like a pretty broad move and might need a little bit more love in the feet by like a frame. Oops, one frame to sort of help make that read. But it definitely feels like a little zippier and more impactful like I want it. I feel like a part of my enjoyment of animation is the picking apart of animation. So maybe it's harder for me to get immersed, but maybe I've never gotten immersed and I've only ever liked to nitpick things. It's actually can be very difficult to like really keep in mind, like even with my own work, the things that I see that are problems that in my brain that I'm like, ugh, everybody's gonna see this little pop, or like, oh, they're gonna know that my arcs weren't perfect, and maybe there is another animator out there who's like, these arcs are bad. Whoever made this should feel bad. But for the most part, I don't find it more difficult to get immersed because I find it fun and engaging. Like I love it so much that even when I look at something that needs work, it's almost like, oh yeah, it's cool that I can. It like never gets old to me that I have gotten to a point where I can recognize when something needs work. And I feel like every time I am able to see the problems with an animation, I guess I still maybe have like a student brain on in a lot of ways where I'm like really proud of myself for just being able to have that skill. And so as far as I'm aware, like there is a lot of the industry that does like scrutinize when things aren't perfect for sure, but I don't think it is so much. It's not like a malicious thing for the most part. I think it's a mutual love and interest, and that's how you geek out about this stuff sometimes, is being like, oh, did you notice that the feet slipped in that trailer for what? And people are like, I did notice that. And then maybe somebody who animated it was like, well, actually we fixed it, but for this trailer. And it's like this mutual sharing and excitement of information. It's cool. I feel like every artist is out there going, an artist's work is never finished, only abandoned. And that is definitely still true for animation as well. There's always changes and things that I'd like to make when I'm working on something, and that's why it's good to have like producers around who can be like, you just gotta stop. You're done. I'll tell you when you're done, and it was yesterday. The schedule's moving. Let's go. Arcane is like one of the most incredible celebrations of animation that I think has ever been created. The team of animators who worked on it are out of this world talented. The art direction, I mean, they've been super talented since they made like the first time I saw the KDA video and many of the same animators worked on Arcane, I was like angry at how good it was. how powerful that animation was, the personality, the subtext, and like how grounded it was like incredible. Like the picture of or like this one shot where Kaisa, I think, is like walking through the subway tunnels, and there's like the subway light, and she's kind of like walking, but like intensely, and like playing with the light, and just kind of like the same way that you like if somebody saw like there's like a little river here, like playing with it, like all of the actions were like had the flick, but her walk was so determined and sassy, and like the way the hips moved has that perfect like jolting of like the bone in the socket that you'd feel in walking that kind of powerful way. It was like the same way with Arcane. Probably the only other thing that really struck me in that way that was like, wow, this is something incredible and special was the Spider-Verse. That was something special. That was something that made me be like, whoa. I think the future of animation is a world where things like Arcane and Spider-Verse are given a chance by even smaller teams. Like the team that made Arcane and the team that made Spider-Verse are like huge productions by huge teams with huge money behind it. And I'm hoping that the future of animation is that stuff becomes more accessible to people. I think the future of animation is ideally a future with a diversity of voices and talent and style that don't exist right now because they haven't been able to learn it yet. So that is what I think the future of animation is. So what I'm doing now in the animation, trying to find those moments where things that just looked kind of off and adding them in. So like this moment of push off, sort of both of Akali's arms sort of looked a little wacko, Inyako, and Dot kind of. And so adding a little bit more life to this motion as though that energy is for this push-up is coming from somewhere. Like I have her arm now bent, but I think in advance of even pushing down, I'll probably push all of this up a little bit so that that force is coming through. It's believable that she's jumping so high because she's like throwing herself up there. Like her arms are helping her to get that leverage. And it's a ruse, but it can feel real to the viewer. And adding a little drag on elbows and things. Like this is the arm that I'm implying is sort of like helping her to maintain her balance. So having that like stay out to that side a little bit longer. Oh man, these arms are so twisted up. If you want to learn how to technically avoid your arms going crazy, which gimbaling is when your rotation controller gets messed up. And so you'll try and rotate the arm and it'll do this a bunch, you know? I just power through. I'll just key it on ones until it's fixed. So having her kind of lean out. I'm not going to fully have her like switch her hand mode into IK, the mode which would make it really look like her hand is sort of sticking to the ground. But I am going to like splay her fingers out a little bit here. I find it really amazing often how much adding a little bit of hand, like specific hand and finger animation can add to something. Even in a game like League of Legends where it's like it's top down and the hands are like really, really tiny, you can really feel like that splay of fingers and having that visual profile from like this to something more slender, and like the way that you would like do a cast of an ability, having like the follow through of the fingers can really emphasize so much. I just added a little bit of like a single dragging pose on the fingers through her falling here, and like it immediately made this falling a little bit easier to parse, a little bit more connected to where it was coming from. So don't forget the fingers. I feel like they're unsung heroes often enough in video game animation. I also think her arm is sort of actually facing the wrong direction in this land. I want her to have sort of the reverse curve from the top, I think, so that she's not kind of like hunched this whole time, and having that like swapping of the curve from the arm with the elbow sort of up to like landing. You feel the weight coming through the landing because the elbows are sinking down, and it all just sort of pulls her down into the ground a little bit more and makes her a little bit more grounded. All right, so this is kind of coming together. Her little head should maybe be looking at us through this. And you'll see I am just sort of, I think maybe she should be looking up. So I'm having her sort of turn, and I think I'm going to have her stay looking at us a little bit longer. I haven't really played with this intro very much. And then start to sort of turn her head. And I'm having her turn her head like quickly. like a ballerina where they like they turn their body, but then they try and keep their head locked in one spot because it like makes the most sense by way of balance and sort of stability when I'm animating at speed. Animations are broken down in like sort of segments where you have keyframes, which are like your main beats of your animation. In this case, I started with like 2 keyframes, right? I'm gonna have her squatting and then I'm gonna have her come up here. And all this stuff in between is sort of like the breakdown of how I get there, but every action is also kind of has keyframes. So like this is the keyframe of like the bottom of the jump, and then the top of the jump keyframe is kind of like here somewhere. And so how you get between those 2 things is you have like a main storytelling beat, which for me is kind of like this awkward, like sort of hunched pose is my breakdown, which is not very pretty, but it's connecting where the head is and like the key element. Then the arms are flowing down to like direct the motion in a way that feels pretty good, even if it's not individually the most beautiful frame. And because it is a breakdown, often called the storytelling pose, keyframes are like what it is and breakdowns are how you get there. I don't know. You don't really notice it. Even though it's like a funky, weird, like hunched over pose that would be like, I never jumped that way. Nobody would ever jump that way. The motion flows better because she's coming up into this. If you pick it apart, there's definitely parts that are not great, but like getting the bulk of the actions in and like the feel for them, specifically the cadence of that root, and generally getting some like kind of cool poses in that have like a good flow. Doing a little bit of offsetting sort of gets you a lot of the way there. A lot of people say animation, like the difference between like a good animation and great animation is like a 10% difference. So I would say this is a good animation. And for 3 hours of work, a good animation is something that is, is pretty good. Looking at the end, I'm going to do just a little bit here because it's a little static, but then I'm going to get into some of the things that are like the cherry on top kind of little details that even for like a good animation can elevate it into a place of really strong appeal that feels really nice. And that would be like animating the hair and a little bit in this facial rig. So the last thing I'll do really quickly is like my really quick how I'd animate hair. I have my last pose and my first pose. I think I had one little pose in between that I liked at 46, and I'm just gonna delete the rest of them because who needs them? I animate the hair really quickly as like a whole chunk. So there's some motion right at the very beginning. I'll just add like a little wiggle in some direction. She's kind of going downwards, so I'll have it come up a little as she goes down. And then I basically, as a whole chunk, I will animate the whole thing. For really broad movements like her head kind of looking down, I'll just go in and animate sort of the root of the hair so it's not super broad. And then as she flips like this, I'm gonna have her hair sort of twist and continue the arc of this motion. So you really feel that she's spinning and really just doing it all as one and then coming around. Akali kind of has like this big ball of a ponytail, and like I wouldn't try and make it really fluid. I would try and keep it more springy, much like the rest of her, because there's so much mass to it. I would just expect it to have like a little bit to stay more as a mass, more like a feather duster than like a true flowy piece of hair. So I added a couple extra keys in there to bring it out away from her body, and then added a little bounce back through here. And even though it doesn't look like perfectly good when it gets to this pose, she's not in this pose for very long. So I would just make sure that the jumping pose, this ponytail is really clearly sort of pointing down. And then I might move it to stretch it a little bit. So then when we get to the top, I'd drag it down a little bit and let it kind of flow up like this. And probably in a similar way, I'd want it to kind of swoop through like her arms do. And then coming up into the final pose, I just bring it up a little. It's maybe a little much, a little late. And then I basically take everything, and at most points, except for like literally this jump pose here, I'll take everything, all 3 curves, and just offset them by 1. And then through here, all of this is probably fine. But then through all of this again, I'll offset it by 1. And then I'll deselect the root bone, and I'll do the same thing by an additional key. And then I'll take just, oops, did I do just that one? Yeah, I'll take the last 2, and then I'll do just the last hair bone, and then offset it one more time, and in the ends by like 2 frames. And it's like a really cheap way of getting some quick little bits of life in the ponytail. And then the last little sort of finishing touch, I think I've said the last little thing I'd do like a whole bunch of times now, is like the hair, adding a little bit of life to the face can help. So she does this quick spin. So because she's doing something like a little extreme, I would first sort of like zero out the position of all of the eye bones so that she's starting to sort of look in the direction I think that she should look. But then I'll also close her eyes while this happens through the whole spin and then not have her open it till she gets to the other side. And it just gives sort of the impression that humans often blink as soon as they turn their head. It's like their first reaction is to blink while they do stuff like that. So having your eyes closed for like a fast motion is like kind of counterintuitive, but I think it ends up feeling pretty good. I'll probably keep her eyes open for like the way down, maybe even widen them a little bit, which looks a little intense, but ends up reading as like nicely exaggeration. Oh, she's like, oh, I'm excited. I'm jumping. Yay. So widening those eyes on the way down as just a little bit of a character moment. And then as she sort of squishes in here, keeping her eyes, she's looking at something, but then closing them again. So let's see what this looks like now. Well, I'll leave it at that. I started with these 2 key poses, and like this is the story that I chose to tell today was of Akali doing this little martial jump thing. But truly, animation can be done any number of ways. So when I was rehearsing, I started with my 2 key poses. I did this one as a practice for today to see how much animation could I really get done. And so my goal was to say, I'm gonna take these same 2 key poses, the first one that I started with and the last one with the little finger heart, and just go straight ahead and create an animation. And this is what I ended up with. And so as sort of the secondary part of the experiment today was like, I'm gonna take those same 2 key poses and tell a different story. And so this was the story I told when I was practicing in the exact same way that I just did today. And then this is, what we ended up with today, which is a different mood, same character, like they still live in the same world. Like I could picture this girl doing both, but it's like 2 different ways of getting to the same place. And I think that's the exciting thing about animation is that the perspectives and the ideas and the feelings of whatever people are feeling in that moment are going to create a different product that is cool and beautiful and something that I would never make. And this is actually just sort of a sneak peek at something we'll be doing with the animation community, where this rig will be released as a free educational resource, and maybe it will be part of a fun competition that if you are watching this video and you're getting riled up about animating, well, there's more in store for you. So keep your eyes peeled. I am happy with how it turned out. Doing sort of an experiment like this can be like really stressful. Animation I think of as often a more long form art form, whereas something like this I might usually take, at least give myself a whole day to create something like this piece. And so even having done it for, 8, 12, like whatever you want to say, years of me doing this, there's like a moment halfway through where I'm like, is this gonna come together? And still feeling myself ask those questions this far in, and then seeing the result is like, okay, we made it. And it wasn't pretty, and it was like very messy, and sometimes it was just powering through and keying on every frame to get rid of, wiggly arm poses or knee pops or whatever. But yeah, I'm super happy with how it turned out. If you enjoyed hanging out with me here today, you can follow me on Twitter as the best place. I'm at LatienI, which is LATIENIE. I also run the Riot Animation Team community social media, which we are at Rat Animators, and we do monthly streams on Twitch, so you can check us out there. And if you just want to see more wonderful art, please stick around, keep your eyes peeled for the next episode.